Warning, this content may be upsetting or disturbing to some audiences. You weren't stabbed and impaling because there's already a hole for the stick. What is the most horrific torture device or execution method you've ever seen? The brazen bull, where they put you in a metal bowl and then heat it with a fire, so that when you cook, your screams can be heard. And then when you start to boil, your water escapes in steam out of its nose. Fun fact: the only known person to have been killed this way was the guy that made it. Supposedly Phalaris, the emperor the bull was made for, was so disgusted by the device he decided to kill Paralos, the inventor. It would be hard to beat impaling, dying slowly over days with a wooden pole through your body. Vlad Tepes impaled kids too. You weren't stabbed and impaling because there's already a hole for the stick. Upside down sawing from groin all the way down. Blood stays in your head so you stay conscious. So awful. A few years ago I saw a cartel video where they had a guy hung upside down by his feet, both spread apart. They cut off his whole scrotum and penis and put it in his mouth and then took a big 2-person tree saw and started sawing him from his taint up. It was horrific and I'll never forget it. When they sew your butthole closed and keep feeding you. In the late 2000s, Iraqi squads executed gay men by supergluing their anuses and then giving them laxatives. In concentration camps, Nazis were tying women's legs together when they were about to give birth. White torture is a form of sensory deprivation where the imprisoned is kept in a white room, made to wear white clothes, as are all the guards, and they're even served white food on white plates. The lights are kept on at all times, no one was allowed to speak, and their shoes are padded to muffle sound. The lack of color is apparently very mentally damaging. Scaphism. They leave you in a tub of water, constantly feed you so that you keep on pooping. You end up covered in your own poop until your body starts getting devoured by the parasites which appear within your poop. That cage thing they put on your belly with a rat inside, then they heat the cage so the rat starts to panic and tries to get out by digging into your belly. I don't remember where I saw it. I'm really hoping it was in a book and never really existed in real life. Keel hauling. The victim is dragged along the underside of a ship so that the barnacles will cut and shred them while simultaneously drowning them. Not to mention the salt water getting in their wounds. Ling Chi, an ancient form of torture and execution from China in which the condemned is slowly and systematically cut into pieces through the use of literally thousands of knives. Fun fact: the families of the condemned to die like this would bribe the executioner to accidentally cut an artery early on sometime. Of course, that only worked if you had a family powerful and important. This is what Westerners call the death of 1,000 cuts. Taylor Swift has a song called Death by 1,000 Cuts on her new album. Now I'll wonder about her. The Thailand chicken coop prison, where you'd be under the coop in the cell and the chicken's droppings would fall on you with no escape. Without ventilation you may actually die from a lung issue before being crushed or starving. Bamboo honeymoon is what I call it. I'm sure they had another name. But essentially you get strapped in a case over bamboo and left there. They will come to feed you and put honey on your body and face, and make sure you stay alive, so you feel every inch of your body eaten by animals and insects, while the bamboo is growing into your rear end. It sometimes took up to 40 days for prisoners to die, when I remember correctly. And this is non-fictional. The pear of anguish looks pretty awful. The pear consisted of a metal body, usually pear-shaped, divided into spoon-like segments that could be operated by turning a screw. This contraption was originally meant to be inserted to one's mouth to crank the key piece to expand the metallic petals. The quadruple or triple petals expand outward, forcing the victim's inner mouth capacity to stretch beyond its limits. The Spanish donkey. One of the torture devices during the Spanish Inquisition, this is probably one of the most gruesome of them all. The naked victim is put astride, so that their feet can't touch the ground, on a donkey-like apparatus. The construction is made up of metal or wood, a vertical board with a sharp V-wedge on top of it. To enhance pain at this stage, torturers tied weights to the ankles. This caused rupturing of the perineum, and copious blood loss, often ending with a painful apex as the sacrum bone breaks. The Syrian Ministry of the Interior used a tool called the Black Slave, that was basically a chair where the torture victim would sit on while nude. In the space under the cushion were large very hot skewers that would enter the victim's anus and keep going until it reached the intestines. They would do a push or pull method until the victim collapsed under the stress or spoke. Edge of a sheet of paper across your eyeballs. A kid in my class in like 5th grade was swinging around construction paper and got me right across my left eyeball. One of the worst things that's ever happened to me, and I've been through some stuff. One of the most brutal one I ever heard of was that of Robert Francois Damien. Damien attempted to assassinate King Louis XV in 1757, so he was sentenced to death. Thousands of people showed up to witness the execution. First, the hand he attempted to stab the king with was dipped in ethanol and then lit on fire. Then they took red-hot metal pincers and ripped away his calves, quads, pecs, biceps, and triceps. They then poured molten metal into the gaping wounds where his muscles once were. After that, they tied each limb to a horse and made them ride in opposite directions. When it was clear that they weren't pulling hard enough to rip him apart, the soldiers beat Damien's joints with hammers to speed up the process. The entire ordeal lasted over 4 hours. Meet the alkali bath. You have probably heard of an acid bath. But an alkali bath is the other end of the scale, and more than 40 times as painful as an acid bath. Basically, you get the sensation of being burned alive, but your brain will continue working longer, so you will feel every single burning pain that happens to your body. When you enter the alkali bath, and your flesh begins to dissolve, the pain will be intense, like being skinned alive, but then the inner layer of the skin starts to dissolve, and that's where the real pain begins. Add to that the alkalosis overexciting your nerves, causing them to become inflamed, and the convulsions that will soon follow, and you have what is probably the most painful way to die. This old guy I used to work with would tell stories about torture in Vietnam, and this one stuck with me. They'd tie the captive to a chair with his hands behind his back and bring in a hooker. She would pull his pants down and dance, touch, suck, whatever was necessary to get him rock hard. Then they would take a thin bamboo reed and slide it down his urethra. And they'd bend his penis in the middle really quick so that it snapped off inside. While not explicitly for torture, there is a pretty horrific method in a short story called The Jaunt. Sometime in the future, humanity invents a method of instant teleportation. The thing is, you need to be knocked out by anesthesia prior to using it. The story goes into the history of the machine where testing on animals and, later on, humans revealed that though the process of teleportation is outwardly instant, the conscious mind of the teleported experiences billions of years in a white void, alone but for the company of their own thoughts, unable to move, unable to die. One scientist shoves his wife, awake, into a machine and closes off the end point. He is convicted of murder because, although she is technically still alive, she's screaming somewhere in the ether, alone, for all of eternity. The Devil's Brew, or the Blood Eagle. The Devil's Brew is pouring hot, liquid silver down your throat. I can't even describe how horrific it must be. Your whole inside will be burned, but you probably won't die from that. No, you'll die from suffocation as the silver slowly hardens in your throat and the air can't get to your lungs. The Blood Eagle might be even worse. You start in a kneeling position with your hands tied above your head on either side. What happens first is they cut open your back, from top to bottom. Then every single rib you have is systematically broken one at a time and pulled away from the center, like you're opening a cardboard box. Your lungs are pulled out and put on your shoulders, and as they continue to breath in and out, salt is poured all over your back. You eventually bleed to death. Heard about the Devil's Brew from a history book, and the Blood Eagle was described in a TV show I watched a while back. I can't imagine how horrible these would be to go through. Crucifixion the way the Romans did it. The method varied a bit regionally, but quite often before the prisoner was crucified they would be scourged. Not whipped. Scourged. The scourge was like a whip, but it had pieces of bone, broke glass, metal, or the like in the thongs of the whip so that it would rip and tear. The victim's back might be bare ribs in many places after the scourging. Then they were led through the streets carrying the crossbeam of their cross to the place of their death before being crucified. They would be nailed to the cross through their wrists and ankles with 5 to 7 inch nails. The position of the victim hanging on a cross would make it difficult for them to breathe. They had to push themselves up on the nails in their ankles to take a breath in, then let themselves down to hang from their wrists to exhale, rubbing their raw back on the cross the whole time. A criminal would usually hang on the cross for days before finally dying of exposure, starvation, suffocation, or other grisly ends. Sometimes the guards would break the prisoner's legs if they were taking too long to die, making it impossible to raise themselves to breathe. Oh, and did I mention that the person was naked when they were crucified? And it would usually be done near a road so people walking by could see them, increasing the shame. It was one of the most cruel and excruciating forms of execution ever devised by mankind. The word excruciating even gets its roots from crucifixion. Well done for making it through the video. Please consult your therapist, because normal people would have turned it off after 2 minutes. Anyway, hit the subscribe button and activate the notification bell for more videos that ruin your day. Don't forget, video games make people violent. All these torture methods appeared straight after GTA 4 was released.